I work nights on State Route 41, the kind of road that keeps old curves even after the map forgets them. 8 years on patrol teaches you to listen to distance as if it were a person with something to confess. There is the hiss of a semi taking a grade it does not respect, the slap of loose tarp against a trailer that should have been parked, the soft thrum of a farm's pivot irrigator turning in the dark like a mechanical prayer. The mile markers are a metronome that counts beats you cannot escape. And mile 87 is a habit the road cannot break, no matter how many times the state tries to teach it new manners. On this particular Tuesday, the air had that stillness that comes before weather decides what it wants to be. The radio played the usual symphony of minor emergencies. A domestic where nobody wants to press charges, a wellness check on an address that turns out to be an empty lot, the kind of small mysteries that fill a logbook without filling the spaces between the lines. At 1:03 a.m., dispatch patched a woman's voice through, steady and strange in a way you hear from people who are not supposed to be calm when they should be screaming. "Rollover by the old county line road," she said. Her voice had the texture of someone who had practiced the words before dialing. Address 2809. The line coughed and cleared itself with a sound like gravel settling in a throat. I wrote the address on my pad with a pen that had survived 3 winters in this car, then looked up at the windshield and felt something cold settle in my stomach like a stone someone had thrown from a great height. The cross street does not exist anymore. County Line Road got pushed north when the state fixed the floodplain 3 summers back after the river decided to practice being a lake. The house at 2809 burned down the winter before last. The lot got scraped and seeded, and the county let the number die with it because there is no point in keeping an address for a foundation that has been taught to forget what it used to hold. I acknowledged the call because that is what you do when the radio expects an answer, and took the westbound shoulder from mile 85 to 87, lights off, because a rollover that calls itself needs ears more than it needs spectacle. The shoulder stretched ahead of me like a gray tongue, and I drove it at the speed you use when you are not sure what you will find, but you know it will not be what was reported. No debris scattered across the asphalt. No glass winking under my headlights like broken promises. No skid marks painting the story of a decision made too late. The west shoulder showed only the stutter of a vehicle that had thought about pulling over and chosen pride instead. The kind of tire pattern you see when someone slows down to make a phone call they do not want to make. Down in the ditch were 2 sets of impressions in the dirt. One longer, heel deep, the stride of someone walking with purpose towards something they could not avoid. The other lighter, toe stopped, as if the person had changed their mind about being there, but could not change their mind about having been. A barbed wire fence along the property line had its middle staple worked loose, the way a rancher will open a pass for a week and fix it later with a story about cattle that needed moving. On the far side, the field bellied down into a shallow, drawn visible from the asphalt crown, the kind of hidden place that exists only when you need it to. That is where the car had tucked itself, wheels up, like something that had fallen from a great height and decided to stay. It was too clean. An upside-down body should look like it has negotiated with dirt and lost. This one looked lifted from a dealership photo and placed wrong side on a set, as if someone had been careful about the staging. Window glass intact, not a spider web or starred impact anywhere. Tires crisp, with tread that had not yet learned the language of the road. Chassis with a sheen that caught the moon like it was posing for a photograph it would never see. A key sat in the cup holder with a fob from a gym that closed 2 summers ago. After a boy got hurt on a machine the owners could not afford to replace and could not afford to fix. The cabin dust hung suspended as if someone had tapped the headliner and told the motes to perform for an audience that was not there. On the headliner were gray rub marks like a palm had pressed soot into cloth in circles made by hands trying to explain something that could not be explained with words. I called it in to dispatch and heard my own voice sound smaller than it should in the open air. Confirmed rollover, single vehicle, no visible occupants. The words felt like coins dropped into a well that was deeper than anyone had measured. The radio crackled back with the kind of silence that means someone is writing things down they do not want to write. The footprints circled the driver window twice, with the careful attention of someone reading fine print in the dark. The smaller set returned toward the fence, stopped short of the ditch as if the person had decided to hover or learn to turn into a different kind of evidence entirely. The larger set paced north 20 yards and erased itself like a calculator that understands shame, fading into nothing, where the dirt became harder and less willing to hold secrets. I called fire and a wrecker and stepped back to listen, because metal sometimes tells you its mood as it cools from whatever heat it has been carrying. This metal did not cool. It did not warm. It was the temperature of a polite argument, the kind that never gets loud enough to resolve itself. The night air moved around it without resistance, as if the car had learned how to take up space without displacing anything else. While I waited for backup, I walked the perimeter and tried to build a story that would fit the evidence. Single vehicle rollover, driver walks away, leaves the scene. It happens. People get scared, people get worried about insurance or outstanding warrants or the kind of trouble that follows you home from a bar. But the footprints told a different story, one that did not end with someone walking to the road to catch a ride. They ended with someone deciding to become something other than footprints. Dispatch came live again 20 minutes later with a second call. Male voice this time, early middle age, flat like someone with a low battery in his heart. He repeated the dead address with the precision of someone reading from a card. 2809 County Line Road, westbound side. There was a pause. Then, I can see the car. Then another pause that stretched like a rubber band. Then, nobody is bleeding the way a person bleeds. And he stopped. The line did not click or drop or give any of the usual signs that a call had ended. It just ended, the way a story ends when the teller sees who they are telling it to. I asked dispatch for a callback number and got silence, then a series of tones that meant the system was trying to trace something that did not want to be traced. The caller ID showed a prefix that looked familiar in the wrong way, the kind of familiar that makes you check your rearview mirror more often than you need to. I wrote it down in my logbook with careful numbers and tried not to think about why my handwriting looked smaller than usual. The fire captain is the type of man who has seen what happens to people who become their work, and he looked at the car with that boredom that respects no myths and asks no questions that do not have practical answers. No glass, he said, walking around the vehicle with the thoroughness of someone who has learned not to be surprised by the ways metal can fail. No gouge mark, no impact pattern. Thing looks like it was placed here by someone with a crane and a sense of humor. We hooked a tractor to the frame and turned the car right side without effort, the kind of easy lifting that makes you wonder why cars ever stay upside down in the first place. The belly was showroom perfect, which is not a word you enjoy saying at 1:30 a.m. in a field that used to hold a house. No scrapes from rocks, no oil stains, no dirt pack in the wheel wells. It looked like something that had spent its life in a garage waiting for a special occasion that never came. The plates traced to a woman in the next county over who had junked the car 6 months earlier. The destruction paperwork had gone through the proper channels with the proper signatures and the proper dates. The metal had been listed as in transit to a recycler who never registered receiving it, which is not unusual because paperwork has its own sense of timing and does not always arrive when it is expected. But it is not normal for paperwork to decide to go on a night drive and call itself in to the authorities. The recycler, when I reached him by phone, sent a still from his yard camera, the same make and model in a claw, date stamped the week. The state had shifted the mile marker after the curve realignment project. Time has a way of stacking its receipts where we do not think to sort them, and sometimes the receipts rearrange themselves when we are not looking. The timestamp showed the car being processed for scrap at the same time it was supposedly driving itself into a ditch that no longer existed at an address that had been deleted from the county records. While we stood around the car and exchanged the kind of professional shrugs that mean nobody wants to be the first to say what they are thinking, a third call hit the dispatch board. Boy's voice this time, not a child, but not a child, the kind of voice that exists in the space between what you remember being and what you hope to become. He is leaving now, he said, and the prefix traced to a block of numbers that the phone company had retire. To when they modernized the switch by the river. I know that prefix. Every deputy who has worked this stretch of 41 knows that prefix because it belongs to a story that cannot help but tell itself whenever someone new joins the patrol. Years back, before the curve moved and the line got straightened by engineers who had never driven it in the rain, a car had reversed itself into the ditch directly across from the house at 2809. Not rolled, not skidded, not lost control. reversed with the kind of deliberate precision that suggested the driver had been practicing the maneuver for some time. Two men came out from the porch of that house with a flashlight, and a need to be the kind of people who walk toward trouble, because nobody had ever clapped for them in high school, and they were still trying to earn applause from an audience that had stopped paying attention. The driver of the reversed car said something soft in a voice that carried despite its quietness, and then stopped being a person for a while in the way that people sometimes do, when the world becomes too much of itself to bear. One of the men called it in from a landline, because that was back when landlines still existed, and phone numbers stayed connected to places instead of following people around like loyal dogs. The call came through on that same prefix that had just delivered the boy's voice, and the man reported an accident that was not quite an accident, and a driver who was not quite a driver anymore. When the deputies arrived, they found the car and the men, and a story that fit together like puzzle pieces from different boxes. Later, that same man got sick and did not fix it, the way some people choose not to fix things that can be fixed because fixing requires admitting that something was broken in the first place. The boy who had been in the house left for a city that did not remember his last name, and did not ask him to explain who he had been before he arrived. The house took the one wrong spark an old electrical panel can offer, and learned to be heat and smoke and memory, and then learned to be nothing at all. The county raked the lot after the insurance settled and taught grass to grow where a foundation had been, because grass is cheaper than explanations and grows faster than questions. But grass remembers what roads teach it, and sometimes it grows in patterns that suggest it is trying to spell something in a language we have not learned to read yet. We towed the car because that is what you do when you do not know what else to do, and the manual does not have a section on vehicles that exist in too many places at the same time. On the key fob was the name of the gym, and on their old website cached by a machine that hoards information the way some people hoard newspapers, there was a note about a memorial service for a member with the same last name as the family that had lived at 2809. The captain wrote distances in his report, and we wrote times and hours, and the phone company wrote a note. Nobody will read about legacy prefixes that sometimes echo calls from numbers that no longer exist. The state's Department of Transportation sent a map that still faintly showed the old curve like a bruise under new skin, the kind of mark that fades but never completely disappears. After 3 o'clock, when the wind settled and the field began to do that thing it does when it plays the old curve for itself, I stood on the crown of the road at mile marker 87 and let my ears be more honest than my eyes. If you know how to listen, you can hear tires cutting a bend that no longer exists, taking a turn that was straightened out by progress and efficiency, and the kind of forward thinking that does not account for the places that refuse to be improved. People talk about hauntings like they are about the dead coming back to bother the living. But patrol teaches you that hauntings are about maps, about the way places remember their old shapes even after we have taught them new ones. Roads are patient and they practice being themselves long after we have decided they should be something else. Tonight, State Route 41 practiced being the road it used to be, and 3 ghosts called it in out of habit and duty, and the kind of love that does not know how to let go. We turned the car over to the impound yard because evidence does not like sleeping under. Stars and questions multiply in the dark like bacteria in warm water. On the drive back to the station, I looked at the mileposts and thought about how numbers on metal teach the brain to be a metronome, counting time in increments that never change even when everything else does. One more call came in just before end of shift, from a person who did not say their name and did not wait for me to ask. They wanted to know if we had gotten there in time, which is a question that assumes there was a right time to get there and a wrong time, and that the difference between them matters to someone other than the people who have to write the reports. We had gotten there in time to do what a night allows, write down what stays and what insists on leaving, and try to tell the difference between the two. Mile markers, like people, move when the state decides they need to move. Curves, like habits, do not move, not always, not completely. They leave impressions in the dirt and in the memory and in the way headlights cut through the dark on certain nights when the air is still and the radio is quiet and the road decides to tell you a story you did not ask to hear. The address at 2809 stayed, dead in the county records, but the phone number lived long enough to try again, to reach across the gap between what was and what is and ask if anyone was listening. The road, which is the only thing out here with a memory we have to respect by statute and by the kind of common sense that keeps patrol cars between the ditches, kept its practice. When you drive past mile 87 tomorrow with coffee hot and a song on the radio teaching you lies about how mornings fix everything that breaks in the dark,
do not look left toward the field where the grass grows in patterns. If you do look,
and if the light is wrong in the right way, you will see a patch where the grass lays flatter, roughly the size of something heavier than the night air, and you will have to choose between inventing a story that makes sense and letting mine hold the weight of the questions that have no good answers. Either choice will cost you something, and the price will be the kind of sleep that does not come with dreams attached. If you want a reason for what happened tonight, I can sell you 3 cheap ones that will spend like real money until you try to buy the thing you actually need. Reason 1. Paperwork lags behind reality, and sometimes reality lags behind paperwork, and in the space between them, impossible things become temporarily possible. Reason 2. Recyclers mislabel inventory. Phone companies retire prefixes without checking who might still be using them, and boys find old numbers in lists their uncles kept in drawers they were told never to open. Reason 3. Stress and fatigue can make experienced officers see patterns where none exist and hear voices that are only echoes of their own expectations. The expensive reason, the one that costs more than most people can afford to pay, is that places practice being themselves long after we retire them, and some places are better at practicing than others. The road rehearsed a rollover tonight at mile 87, in the field where a house used to stand, and 3 people who are no longer people called it in, because calling it in was what they did when they were. People and habits die harder than the people who form them. That reason costs sleep and certainty and the comfortable belief that when we change a map, we change the place the map describes, but it pays out in the kind of truth that patrol officers need to carry when the cheap reasons will not buy what the night demands, which is a story that can hold its own weight without falling through the spaces between what we know and what we can prove. Tomorrow, there will be paperwork to file and reports to write and questions from supervisors who want answers that fit in the spaces provided on the forms. The car will sit in the impound lot until someone decides what to do with evidence that proves nothing, except that the world is larger and stranger than our procedures account for. The calls will go into a file that will go into a cabinet, that will go into a room where unsolved mysteries wait patiently for the kind of solution that never comes, because the questions they ask are not the kind that have answers, only acknowledgments. But tonight, on State Route 41 between mile marker 86 and mile marker 88, in the space where County Line Road used to connect the living to the dead and the past to the present, something that should not have been possible was possible for exactly as long as it needed to be. 3 calls came from a dead address to report a rollover that happened and did not happen, and the road kept its appointment with the accident that had been waiting years to be called in by people who cared enough to stay on the line until someone answered. Unresolved. Patrol clears the scene. Mile 87 returns to counting beats in the dark. Shift continues until the sun makes liars of the headlights and the road pretends it has never been anything other than the straight line engineers drew on their maps. But patrol knows better, and tonight the road knew we knew, and for a moment that lasted exactly as long as it needed to last. We understood each other perfectly. End report. File under. Unusual circumstances, no further action required. Case closed in the way that cases close when closing them is the only thing left to do. And the only thing that makes sense is to stop asking the questions that will never have the answers we need. The radio crackles with a new call, a domestic disturbance 2 counties over, and I turn the car around and drive toward the kind of trouble that can be solved with patience and paperwork, and the kind of common sense that works in daylight. Behind me, mile marker 87 counts another beat in its patient rhythm, and the field practices being empty until the next time it needs to remember what it used to hold.